Wake up, world. This is Malik Boyd, host of Heart of the City, and I am so excited to have with us a legend in our community and in the country. He is the majority whip and the third ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives, proudly serving our country from the 6th District of South Carolina. Representative James Clyburn, it's great to have you with us on Heart City. Welcome home.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So, Rep, let's get into it. I know your time is very valuable. We're dealing with COVID-19 still. Obviously, the labor market collapsed a year ago, 20 million jobs vanishing in a single month. We're healing, but millions of Americans are still out of work. How do we deal with this labor force, recognizing that Black and Americans, people of color, are still challenged around this labor force and getting back to some sense of normalcy economically?
Well, I think that what we see happening today with our new president, relatively new now, about 102 or 3 days in the presidency, is exactly what needs to be done. He made it very clear in the campaign that his number one priority would be to get beyond this pandemic. He said that he was going to have 100 million vaccinations done within the first 100 days. A lot of people said at the time that was a little bit too ambitious. Well, he reached that in 60 some odd days, and then he set a new goal of getting to 200 million by the time we get to the 100th day, and he reached that on the 92nd day. And he did that because this president is focused on what it takes for this country to get back on track on its pursuit of perfection. We pronounce these things, they sound good to say in order to create a more perfect union. All that is good to say. It's something else to do it. And so what we have is a president who is committed to doing what is necessary to move this country forward. And that's what he was doing with the Rescue Act. The Rescue Act, $1.9 trillion. Oh, we heard from all kinds of people talking about that's too big a price tag. Well, this president never asked the question, but I did for him. What would be the price of not doing it? If 1.9 trillion is too high, how high would it be if people continue to lose their jobs, continue to lose their health, continue in the quagmire that we were in? And that's what was on Joe Biden's mind. Now, you may recall when I made my endorsement back in February of 2020, I got a lot of flack from a lot of people. I don't know who all was in that group. I was only virtual like this not long ago, and I talked about it. The little email I got or text out on social media, someone said that I would not be forgotten or forgiven for ramming Joe Biden down their throats. Well, I wonder what they're saying now. I knew, as my late wife told me, 6 months, well, she told me really September 2019, which was just about 4 months before she passed away in September. She really told me this way back in June at my fish fry, that if we wanted to win, that is Democrats, we better nominate Joe Biden. And we did. And I think that the 60% you've seen in many polls, everything over 50%, people are pleased with what we're doing, their attitudes about the future. I saw one poll that said over 70% of the American people now feel positive about the future of the country. So I think we're doing the things we need to do to get the country back on track. And it speaks to experience. I was asked several days ago what I would attribute to Joe Biden's success. Go back to 2009, when we came out of the Great Recession, losing jobs hand over fist. Joe Biden was put in charge of that recovery. and he knows what it took. He also knows what the other side was doing, trying to keep them from recovering. He talked about that a little bit yesterday when the leader, the Republican leader of the Senate, McConnell, said that he's 100% dedicated to stopping this president's agenda. And the president reminded him. That's what he said back in 2010 when he said his number one job was to make sure that Obama was a one-term president. Well, he failed. Obama was a two-term president. Mm-hmm. And tell you something else. He's going to fail with this because we're going to get this done for the American people.
And I'm sure the American people are more than appreciative of these efforts. It's so important to get us back on track. When we talk about Black businesses ran by people of color, 68% did not return. 90% of Black businesses were impacted by COVID. They were already at a deficit when we talk about lending and being able to have access to capital to sustain themselves in commercial corridors and areas that are being gentrified. What are the plans for recovery specifically for businesses ran by people of color?
Well, let me tell you about just one, and we'll go from there. Mm-hmm. On Monday was the first day for restaurants in this country to access a $28 billion bucket of money to help get them back on track. Now, all of this grows out of a meeting last December that I had when we were trying to put, I'm saying last December, it was earlier than that. It was, we were trying to put the PPP stuff together.
Okay.
And we saw early on that there were some significant failures. The small businesses, minority businesses, were not getting access to the PPP money. Big banks were really dealing only with their customers. We went back in, that was the so-called CARES package. We went back in and did CARES 2, at which time we stipulated that X amount of this money, and I don't remember the exact number now, had to go to small businesses. X amount had to go to minority business. X amount had to go to minority banks, CDs, FIs. These community development finance institutions, we stipulated that in the law. And so when we did this bill, in fact, it comes out of a discussion I was having with some people. They were minority bankers and restaurant owners. Two of the restaurants, one was from Orlando, Florida, and one was from Charleston, South Carolina. And as we were going off the call, the gentleman, Michael, from Charleston, South Carolina, who's one of his 4 restaurants, I think he's got 4 restaurants. I know it's more than one. One of them is in my district. So he said something at the end of the conversations. Is in communities like Charleston, where we rely, our number one industry being tourism, restaurants are really the key to so much. It would be good if there was some dedicated source to getting these restaurants stood back up. That stuck in my head. And I made the case, got other people to work. And so when we passed the so-called HEROES Act, we put money in there dedicated to restaurants because my position was when you look at African-American, brown Americans, small businesses, they're barber shops, they're beauty shops, there are restaurants. These are the kind of businesses we need to get stood back up. So we didn't make it in the HEROES Act. We weren't in charge. My Republican friends took it out in conference. But after the November elections, and then after those special elections in January, we were put in charge. So in the Rescue Act, we put in $28 billion for dedicated to restaurants. And it's kind of interesting because on the first day, Monday,
right,
the largest number of restaurants making an application for that money was in Charleston, South Carolina.
Wow.
And I was on the video with them day before yesterday, or virtual with them day before yesterday, at their meeting, and they talked about how much that meant to them. I was on a phone call with the White House this morning, as they're telling me already that $28 billion is about gone. We may have to do something else. But what it does is, a lot of people say, people have been crammed up. People are now coming out of their homes. We got kids money to allow these restaurants to build outdoor patios so that so that business can thrive. Using the kids money to get their buildings in shape. Using this money to hire people back and to get their restaurants staffed up again. That is just one small amount of what we're doing with the Rescue Act. But I don't want anybody to forget what we did with KS 2, because it was in KS 2 that we took care of small businesses. And one other thing I want to mention about KS 2.
Sure.
In KS 1, the Small Business Administration took the position that if you were a business person and you were in bankruptcy, no matter whether it was Chapter 7 or Chapter 11, whatever, if you were in bankruptcy, you were not eligible. I personally interceded with that. And in KS 2, we did away with that. When somebody comes in and says, I don't want to go out of business, I want to reorganize, and you file bankruptcy in the category that allows you to reorganize, and you are current, why should you be penalized? We got that removed. A significant number of minority businesses, many of them African Americans, were able to access that money, and they're staying open. Just think about an African American in the low country of South Carolina who owns 7 Burger Kings, having to go out of business. He's still in business now because he was reorganizing under, I think it's Chapter 11 is the one, I believe. I can't remember those numbers, but 1 7, 1 is 11, and this ain't no dice game.
I love it. Rep, we are still dealing with not just the business recovery as it relates to people of color, but there is still a climate that needs to address racism in a very real way. It is running rampant, not just in our streets, but seemingly in our legislature. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis just recently signed into law his voting bill around curbing access to mail-in voting. We know very clearly what that does in communities of color, what it does for our seniors who are unable to get to the polls. And so as we see this wave of GOP-led states pushing these limits, what should we be doing? Those who are advocating to suppress these efforts, those who are advocating to increase efforts for voting, where do we need to be? How do we need to support what you're doing to make sure that voting is accessible to all?
Well, several things need to happen. No one thing. One of the things I like to say, the last time, and I tell the story quite a bit, I won't go into the full story here today, but my last, let's just say, stay my last incarceration,
right,
1961.
Yeah.
When I went to jail that day for challenging a system here in Columbia, South Carolina, that night, one of the young high school students who had gotten locked up that day and got a little bit anxious around 2 o'clock in the morning, and he came over to my bed. We were all on these cots down in the rifle range in the basement of the Columbia City Jail, and he was a little bit frightened at 2 o'clock in the morning. And he came over to me and he says, I thought we were going to get out of jail. And I told him, I said, yeah, we're going to get out. Just as soon as Reverend Newman raises the bail. He's out there working on getting our bail. We'll get out in the morning. He walked away. Came back a little while later and said to me, he said, now, Clyburn, who did you say was out raising the bail money? And I said, Reverend I.D. Newman. He said, well, is he that little man with the goatee? I said, yes. He said, he back over in that corner over there. Now, I learned a lesson that night. Yeah. Reverend Newman was supposed to be out raising bail money. Instead, he decided to go to jail with us. Our job was to go to jail. His job was to raise the bail.
Yeah.
It was 3 days later before we got out of jail because he was not playing his role. He started playing our role. And that's what I say to people all the time. We all got roles to play in this. I was on a virtual last night with Andrea Young, the daughter of Andrew Young. She is the executive director of ACLU down in Atlanta. I'm going to be on with ACLU, National ACLU tonight on the virtual. Getting ready for the ACLU to do its work on filing lawsuits. Also on the phone this morning with Cedric Richmond out of the White House, talking about our discussions I'm having with Joe Manchin, who, as you know, is in the Senate and has been one of the outspoken people in favor of the filibuster, which we think is a problem. My job is to work with Manchin to make sure I can get him to a place that we can be comfortable with him not allowing our voting rights and other constitutional rights to be eaten up, as I've been saying more intelligently, so they will not die on the altar of a filibuster. So that's my role to play. Other people will have their roles to play. They're the council, the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund. They are playing a role. We all got roles to play. And the state legislators are doing what they can do. They don't have the numbers to stop these bills, but we've got to use what we can at the national level to get legislation to check these bills. So we all working, and there's no one thing to do, and no one group doing it. Everybody, this is all hands on deck. And I would hope that everybody would play their roles and stay away from trying to make a new headline. The problem that's killing us with all this is people going out trying to make headlines.
Yeah.
And this threatens the ability for us to make headway. And that's what happened to us back in the 60s. And a lot of people get upset when I talk about this, but it's the fact. We lost efforts back in the 1960s when John Lewis and I were in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. When people, I won't call their names, but you remember them from your studies, started yelling, "Burn, baby, burn."
Yeah.
That killed the movement. And people get upset when I talk about today, but I'm all for Black Lives Matter. When I'm doing these virtuals from my home, you'll see the street sign from Washington, D.C., Black Lives Matter Plaza that was given to me by the mayor of Washington. That's always behind me. I support Black Lives Matter. But defund the police is a slogan that cost us in these elections. And I don't care what anybody argues to the contrary. I live here in South Carolina. I've been doing politics all of my life. I know what happened to Jamie Harrison. I saw his campaign plateau when that became the big issue in the waning days of that campaign. So what we've got to do is let me do my job, and I'm gonna let you do your job, and let's see can we get the job done. People just want to be more anxious and more willing to tell me why what I'm doing ain't the right thing to do. Just do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's very clear that the Monday morning quarterbacks have thrown errant passes when we talk about how to move the ball forward and to get yardage as it relates to progress. You mentioned jails and some of the issues that we face today. When we talk about policing, obviously Derek Chavin's case with the murder and death of George Floyd put back in the forefront what people of color, specifically Black Americans, when we talk about, nickel rides here in Philadelphia, other municipalities, some of the trumped up charges that happened to young black men on the street. We just had a officer in Georgia who said, look, beating down black people was sweet relief to him. And so as we talk about relief for black Americans as it relates to policing, there's one side of it that's federal. We're going to have recommendations from Department of Justice and others. Where do the states and localities need to line up to ensure that the teeth that you put into that legislation really takes a bite out of this oppression that is occurring?
Well, I think that these things must work in tandem. Fortunately, with this new administration, we got a Justice Department that has now launched investigations into Minneapolis Police Department under laws that have been out there for a long time that the previous administration refused to use. They're also investigating the Louisville Police Department to determine patterns and practices, and they will make the kinds of recommendations which I believe will really supplement what we're doing with the, once again, that's the Justice Department.
Right.
We in the House of Representatives passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It is now being deliberated, debated, I should say more deliberated, because they're on the Senate floor. You've got Karen Bass and Tim Scott and others deliberating, trying to come up with a bill in the Senate. And hopefully we'll merge the two. They'll come up with something that we can go the conference with. So hopefully we'll have stuff in this law to outlaw chokeholds. We need to do that. It has happened in many jurisdictions. And see, that's why I said the other day, we ought not allow the other side to take us off in these tangents.
Right.
But what I mean by that, when President Biden finished his speech the other night, my colleague here from South Carolina, Senator Tim Scott, responded and gratuitously made the statement about whether or not this was a racist nation. What did that have to do with Joe Biden's speech? Joe Biden didn't make such an accusation. So why did he do that? He did that to bait us into a discussion. No, nobody's talking about whether or not this is a racist nation. We are talking about those racist pockets in racist jurisdictions throughout this, and whether or not the country will tolerate racism. That's what we're talking about. This country decided in 1863 that it would no longer tolerate slavery. In 1954, the country decided we would no longer tolerate segregated schools. So what the job is, whether or not we can do what is necessary to make sure that the country stays focused and will not tolerate pockets of racism. So that is something totally different from the entire country being a racist country. So we ought not let them kick us down these debates. And I've seen it. I saw something, I don't know if it's true or not. Someone sent me a text the other day, said some legislator somewhere referred negatively to Tim Scott and end up having to resign from the legislature. Don't let anybody bait you into those kinds of arguments, because that's not the argument. A racist country would not elect Barack Obama as president. A racist country will not elect Kamala Harris, vice president. But pockets of racism did vote against both of them.
Indeed.
They didn't carry every vote. They didn't carry every jurisdiction. They didn't carry every state. Why? Because there are pockets out there that outvoted the people of goodwill. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his letter from the Birmingham City Jail that I want us all to remember, that he was coming to the conclusion that the people of ill will in our society make a much better use of time than the people of goodwill. There are people of goodwill. We got to start making better use of our time, because the people of ill will, the racists, if you please, are making very good use of their time. So let's not allow these discussions to bait us into saying and going off on tangents, because that's not what's going to get us to where we need to be.
Rep, as we close this interview, for those who are watching who are young at heart, young in age, full of vibrancy and desire and zeal to make a difference, you have tons of experience, not just on the street and advocacy, but in the halls of the Hill. Can you just impart words of wisdom to those individuals who are seeking to make a difference and can use points of focus like you just mentioned?
Well, you know, if I might harken back to that letter, King's letter from Birmingham to the jail, instructs me in so much. My readings in other areas as well. So I'm going to use that letter and two other excerpts from a book.
Okay.
First one, George Santayana once wrote, "If we fail to learn the lessons of history, we're bound to repeat them." You know, when I was studying history back in high school, my professor would give, or teacher would give exams. What year did Columbus discover America? What year did this happen? What year did the Civil War start? And all that kind of stuff.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. When I taught history, I didn't teach that way. I taught issues, lessons to be learned from history, not learning how to regurgitate dates. Because in the first place, Columbus didn't discover America.
Right. Columbus
was lost, didn't know where he was. And that's why the Native Americans, they got the name Indians, because he thought he was in India. So let's not do this. So let's learn the lessons of history. The other, Alexis de Tocqueville wrote way back in the 1830s, America is great, not because it's more enlightened than any other nation, but because it's always been able to repair its faults. There are faults in our systems that need to be repaired. There are faults in law enforcement, faults in delivering medical care, faults in educating our children. We've got to work on repairing those faults, and calling people's names and ticking off on tangents ain't gonna get us there. Last one. When King wrote that letter, not only did he talk about the people of ill will, but he also talked about people being silent. People being silent. And we must break our silence.
Representative Clyburn, this has been most insightful. I really appreciate your time. We honor you and the work that you're doing for our community and for our country. Thank you for taking time to join us from Heart City today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, broadcast audience, you have heard from Representative Clyburn, his honesty, his frank speech. He brought it right to you, let you know exactly what we need to do, how we need to focus as it relates to progress. And more importantly, remember, if you don't understand what happened before, you're bound to repeat it. Know the history, know what has transpired, know the challenges that those who have gone before us have truly faced, so that we know how not to fall back into the same repeated pattern. Representative Clyburn also left us with much vigor around Black businesses, around the communities of color in terms of recovery, what is already present in these bills, what we need to pay attention to, what we need to gain access to in order to recover, restore, and reinvigorate our economy. This has been A pleasure. I hope it has blessed you as it has blessed me. And know that we'll have more conversations like this on our Heart City YouTube channel. We are equally excited as well for our new host, Kendall Goldsberry Chase, who has taken over our weekly show. You can follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Heart City TV. And as always, feel beautiful, look beautiful, and act beautiful.